Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. Today, I have a futurist with me, Mr. Richard Yonck. He happens to be a foresight expert, consultant, keynote speaker, and writer. Richard has written extensively about the future and emerging technologies for numerous publications and was the computing and artificial intelligence contributing editor for the Futurist Magazine. He's the author of Heart of the Machine and Future Minds. Richard helps businesses, readers, and audiences prepare for tomorrow's world. And I think we do the same thing with our own podcast, try to raise awareness about future technologies, exponential technology, and what's it going to do to consumers as well as business. My background, my education is Jills. I dropped out of school, and whatever learnings I have done is through constantly watching movies, understanding music, reading books, watching stuff, videos, and that's how I've kept myself updated. And you rightfully pointed out, I think we're living in a fantastic point of time. There's an acceleration of technology. It's happened through ages, but right now it's become extremely prominent. There's this, and there's not one single technology, and everything is converging, and these converging technologies are adding real world values, and and these things I think are going to completely change the world. So I'm really excited for humanity and where we are at this point in time, an opportunity that the technology is presenting to us. Why don't we start with your book, Heart of the Machine, of future in the world of artificial emotional intelligence.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be here with your show. I absolutely agree. We definitely have a range of overlap in terms of what we hope to bring and the conversations we hope to bring about in the world, either through our writing, our podcasts, and so forth. Okay, I'd be delighted to talk about my books. Certainly, Heart of the Machine. This is about technologies that grew out of really the early to mid 1990s. And they are the technologies that allow computers to be able to read, interpret, and interact with human emotion. Now, that sounds in and of itself pretty phenomenal, but understand that these are still very, very early days for these technologies. And a number of people push back and say, well, they're not really understanding or registering emotion. And that's true at a certain level. But as computers become more and more capable of higher level processing, that it won't be the same as our own, but it will be somewhat more functional, more like our cognition, that will allow being able to register emotions that are perhaps an expression on a face, the sound of a voice, not just to say statistically there's this percentage chance that this person is happy, but to actually be able to register something closer to what philosophers and psychologists refer to as theory of mind, to have these systems be able to apply an actual semi-understanding of human beings and human actions and human motivations to register, okay, that emotion it just detected, is indicative typically of being happy, but actually there may be some other factors that are underlying there that when aspects of personality are applied, really change that interpretation.
Right, yeah. So there's some really cool things happening as well as scary things happening, because today social media can manipulate us in ways we can't even imagine, because whatever or likes or data is being collected. In fact, I think in Zoom, when we're having a conversation, even when the mic is on mute, it's actually collecting audio data. At the back end, there are these applications doing things which are cool as well as scary, and then I think, maybe in the near future, when we have these augmented reality, virtual reality glasses, it's going to do these inside outside tracking. It's going to it'll be able to kind of like capture or where or data on exactly where we are looking at, and then possibly with these brain computer interfaces, then we'll be able to possibly be able to do that what are you talking about. But would you like to talk a little bit about this more, this emotion capturing, once this kind of becomes mainstream, when computers, and these wearable devices are able to do that, what would be the pros and cons of the world?
Absolutely. Great questions, Eddie. And I think that this is really at the heart of when we look at how technology develops, way too often we don't consider early on how fundamental it is that we anticipate and try to understand how it might be not just used, but misused or differently used, so that if these aren't in keeping with human values in terms of how we want to see the future be built, created, that we have to then consider, okay, we aren't necessarily going to be able to stop this technology, but can we build in certain safeguards, certain methods that prevent its abuse or use in ways that demean or diminish the human condition? So when we talk about things like artificial emotional intelligence, or what it's become more commonly known as emotion AI, this is technology that has a lot of potential in terms of being able to change how we interact with our systems. I've written for decades about user interfaces and how these really act as the intermediaries, the go-betweens between ourselves and our technologies. Early on in our development, these were very, very simple. It might have been as simple as a handle on a shovel or a steering wheel. These were the ways that we controlled these devices. Now we interact with our touch phones, our Alexas with speech, all kinds of different ways that we interact with technology, and they require a lot of processing power to be able to do this. With regard to how this technology is used and misused, right now we have a range of concerns where some of it is being used by certain governments, whether it's not just facial recognition, but even to be able to look at influencing the emotions and the sentiments of the users. So when we see, for instance, an example like Canon, I believe in one of the China offices a year or so ago, launched a general product that was essentially a smile technology. They were wanting the users to smile to a camera in order to be able to print, set up a scheduled meeting, be able to access certain doors and so forth, with the concept or with the idea that this would make the place a happier place for workers, which I think many of us would push back on that thinking and say that that sounds extremely Orwellian, very problematic in terms of what is involved in terms of human agency. In terms of what you were speaking about with regard to social media, yes, algorithmic influence in terms of the technologies that we have already, where little nudges based on statistical evaluations of what your likes and dislikes are to direct you in ways that keep you on the platform, by in part influencing and directing your emotional responses. As technologies like this become more capable, we're probably going to see technology, that used as a more controlled and let's just say targeted means of being able to influence human emotion and response and reaction. And this has obviously had some pretty significant impacts on recent elections in a number of countries. It certainly impacts social discourse and the willingness and ability of people to be able to reach a chord beyond their own beliefs and opinions.
So, I mean, before we kind of delve deeper into this conversation, I would like to, remind this to my audience, which I always do, is because, when we talk about technology, I guess there's a larger population which always says that, technology, can take us to a very dystopian, place, or technology is bad, and I would like to remind to all my listeners, because I always do that. I think technology inherently is never good or bad. It's a choice that we make. It can go towards a good place or a bad place. And yes, you pointed out that there are social media companies who are leveraging technology for election manipulation, and data manipulation, and so on and so forth. But there are so many good things about technology, and nobody talks about Facebook being that company which has made the entire world like a group of friends. You can reach out to anyone, everyone, and it's all for free. So yes, obviously that there is that one side, that there is this company, like a big tech giant organization, which at times kind of leverages or data in a way which is not completely aligned to where we would want it to be. But then there are other side of Meta of Facebook which is completely loaded, and I like to point this out because Facebook as a company has got so many plus points. I'm not trying to justify Facebook because it's got its minus points also, but as somebody who's been invested into virtual reality and the metaverse, I think they have kind of single-handedly kind of taken the entire conversation of virtual reality and metaverse forward. Now, I was going through your site and you're talking about the emotion economy, and you also mentioned about AI and emotional AI. Could you talk about how a user interface is going to change with emotion AI?
Part of my job is also to explore where do things go wrong, and try to anticipate these things, because that's really in many respects where we have the best opportunity to leverage this knowledge to be able to create better futures, to catch these things early on before things have kind of developed too far along. With regard to the different ways that these emotion interfaces are going to and are being used, trialed, everything, the retail space is certainly one aspect, whether we're talking about online, but increasingly in situ, in real world, real life shopping situations. There are going to be a lot of different ways that this can be used to better understand the needs and desires of the consumer, of the people who are buying. The question becomes, where do we draw lines? Where do we say this is allowing us to provide extra benefit to the shopper or a person in their smart home, where different parts of the house are able to respond based on a person's mood? That's a very, very useful, potentially interesting scenario where just the simplest form is somebody coming home not feeling particularly good at the end of a workday, which again, maybe not as prevalent with work from home these days, but then walking in the house, sensing their emotional state, and knowing that at the time like this, certain songs, might be worth, piping in just to be able to lift their mood or whatever, if that's something that they had wanted to program into it. On the other hand, when you have it being used by a corporation or a government to be able to register the emotional and aspects of the mental state of the people that work for it, the people who are citizens of it, that becomes much more problematic. So we have to really find a balance between the two. We're not going to do away with a technology like this, but how much do we want to allow it to pervade our environment? So in order to be able to use some of these technologies, there have to be sensors in the environment, which, as we know, with things like IoT, Internet of Things, those are becoming increasingly prevalent, whether it's cameras, other types of sensors, audio detectors, and so forth. This reaches into aspects of privacy that we have to say, okay, is this something we want? Where do we draw the line in terms of legislation, in terms of regulation, and so forth?
You also written Future Minds, the rise of intelligence from the Big Bang to the end of the universe. Would you like to talk about the book?
So the concept of the book is to explore the future of intelligence, both human intelligence, artificial intelligence, and pretty much anything and everything in between. And in order to do that, it needed to start, I felt, from a suitable definition of what intelligence is. The simple word intelligence, like consciousness, like a number of other rather broad and vague words, are what AI pioneer Marvin Minsky referred to as a suitcase word. Essentially has so many different meanings and connotations that when we talk about intelligence, when we talk about consciousness, we tend to conflate a lot of different aspects of it, and it tends to confuse the conversation very rapidly. So I wanted to get to something that was really a fundamental definition of what intelligence is. So when I looked at the literature that was out there, looked at some of the work being done by people like Shane Legg back in over a decade ago, there are like 200 definitions of what intelligence is in general out there in the literature. So trying to drill down and understand what is overly human-centric, what is just too broad because it can practically include a rubber band, to be able to home in and actually understand where that kind of a central concept around it. I looked to some work being done by a number of physicists that explored the idea that intelligence seeks to maximize its own freedom, its future freedom of action. And that really captures the concept that runs throughout the book. So we can start from early self-organizing polymers that incorporate chemicals, molecules, and over time overrun or take an advantage over other stochastic processes that occur. And by doing this, they actually tend to self-replicate and become more prevalent than other processes in the environment. The same thing continues through with cellular life once we move to a point where blanking on the word, but basically where life gets started about 4 billion years ago here, that pretty much continues then and carries on through multicellularity, through the development of various larger fauna and organisms, all the way through to consciousness, civilization, and these patterns of self-replication, of emergence that arise out of a number of these lead to different levels and types of intelligence that I just found fascinating and wanted to explore in depth in this book.
Intelligence. Yes, it's the reason I think this blue dot is exciting, in the entire expanse of universe. And you rightfully pointed out, I mean, if we started from, a couple of particles, the Big Bang, and then everything that we see, touch, feel is nothing else but particles, and then the physics, and the chemistry, and the biology. It's from single cell to multiple cell. There's some interesting things have happened in the evolution, that and there are so many mysteries and so many deep dives that there are so many no-goes, especially in the quantum physics zone, but it's an exciting thing, that the life itself and that intelligence, the evolution of intelligence, right now we are seeing machine intelligence. I mean, I'm not talking about like artificial general intelligence, but there are machines which are doing some really cool things. I mean, would you like to talk about the future of minds, the future of intelligence, and
Sure.
Your views?
Essentially, we have been bootstrapped. Our own intelligence has been bootstrapped by technology. Our relationship with technology has been iterative, has been self-supporting, with each of these two camps lifting each other up. As we developed more and more knowledge, and we were able to develop more complex technologies. As these technologies came about, they changed us. Every technology ultimately changes us. When we look at, in the modern era, how we take in information from the different social media, from different aspects of our technological world, lots of people have pointed out that they're losing their ability to read long form. The way that they concentrate is different. The technology we are using, the technology we develop, changes us. And this is really fundamental. We used to have phenomenal, a lot of people had phenomenal memories thousands of years ago for different types of memorization. They use different types of mnemonics, use different types of aspects of rhythm and song to be able to remember these very long and extremely large bodies of work. And then along comes writing. And Plato is famously said that this was going to destroy our memories, that our ability to memorize, that it was going to reduce knowledge to something that people could just simply look up and didn't have to memorize, and that this was going to just be the end of civilization. Well, this was really the beginning of a whole new chapter, and it transformed us. It transformed how we engage with our technology and how we develop and build our own intelligence. So to continue from this, as we look out through the 21st century, the technologies we've reached at this point are not intelligent in the sense of having, they can do certain things, they can sense, they can respond, but there isn't a level of self-awareness there yet that truly we would typically assign to certain types of life. And yet, on the other hand, single cells, their life, and have a certain kind of intelligence, being able to move through their environment in search of food or away from different problems, chemical gradients, and so forth. But machines are probably on a comparable level in terms of level of self-awareness at this point. That doesn't mean they won't become much more so in time. But the thing that people tend to think a lot of people, certainly the press, tend to think about machine intelligence is that it's going to be when they way more similar to our own and to ourselves than is actually possible. It starts from such fundamentally different points in terms of the substrate being used, the idea of using silicon and of using electrons to create gates, to create levels of yes, no, binary language that's just not how a neuron works. A neuron is a much vaster, much more vastly complex component than a transistor or even a whole cluster of transistors. So that means that in many respects, we may be able to emulate aspects of our own intelligence. We already do with neural nets and neural networks and so forth. But we're not going to, I believe, reach the point where these systems think like us. We can get into the philosophy of that, if you want, but the point is that as we look out, I foresee that we're going to have more technologies that augment our own intelligence, where these next number of decades are going to be increasingly around a hybrid intelligence, where we're able to work with our machines to be able to have them do what they do best, which is certain types of highly repetitive, highly statistical work to supplement our own levels of creativity, imagination, and empathy, and so forth. So it's going to be a really interesting period, but it's not going to be one where, as you know, many of the fiction and movie makers would have us believe, the end of the world due to the rise of the robots or anything like that.
Right, right. I think Hollywood does a very good job in, painting AI as an existential threat. The Terminator and so on and so forth. Yeah, you mentioned that the machines are getting intelligent, but you said that we will not get to a point where machines will be able to think like us. I would like you to, elaborate on that. It's all started with Ilya Sutskever. He's the Open AI CTO, and he tweeted that these large language neural network models are slightly conscious, and there was a huge debate on the press that, what's he saying? But then recently, Blake Lemon, the Google engineer, made headlines after claiming that Google's Lambda AI is sentient. Now Lambda, according to him, is a little different because it's made out of various components. It doesn't just have these large language models. So it has Mina, which is a large language model, but it also has Alpha Star, a training algorithm, which is developed by DeepMind, a Pathways AI model. Plus, it seems that the Lambda AI model is connected to the entire internet, the entire YouTube, Google search. So it's constantly taking this information and iterating and growing. Now, yes, the larger camp believes that artificial intelligence will not become artificial general intelligence. It won't have human level capabilities. A conscious machine, it won't go there. But there is a certain camp like Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and the likes, who are saying that it is possible. Though, at this point in time, it does not look like the Lambda AI model is anywhere close to being sentient. What are your views on it, since you mentioned that machines won't be able to think like us? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So a lot of different points to cover here. So first of all, AI is going to become vastly more intelligent and is going to, especially in these coming next few decades, acquire some capabilities that are much more in keeping with what we think of as human intelligence. Things like zero-shot learning, one-shot learning, where these systems can learn and infer and build bases of knowledge much more like a child does. The example I love to give is that you have to take hundreds of thousands, millions of pictures of a cat to train early neural networks what a cat is or what a cat looks like. You can show a young child a couple of pictures of a giraffe. They will always know what a giraffe looks like. If you show them a horse and they learn what a horse is, later on you tell them, oh, a zebra is a horse with black and white stripes. They never have to see a zebra to be able to know what that is, but using inference, when they do finally see one, they'll know that is a zebra. That's something closer to what we refer to as zero-shot learning. Let's get into the sentience, sapience question and issue. First of all, AGI, artificial general intelligence, is a target that has been talked about for decades now for computers. The idea that at a certain point, a system will develop or be developed that is at a level or even far exceeding that of the human mind. The problem with that some aspects of that are possible, but the part of the problem is the reference to general intelligence. It assumes we have general intelligence. We do not. We have very, very niche specific intelligence. We occupy what Stephen Pinker referred to as the cognitive niche, he and a number of others. And this is very, very specific to our species. Philosopher, I can't remember his first name, but Nagel wrote a famous paper, What is it like to be a bat? With the idea that every single species is only truly knowable to its own kind. That we can only infer, we can only guess what something like echolocation might be for a bat. Trying to expect another animal to understand calculus. I mean, each of these, it goes both ways. These systems they are going to have their own capability of understanding, their own capability of achieving some pretty phenomenal things, but they won't do it the same way we do. And that's one of the places we have to be very watchful. So in terms of what's been happening recently, we have we're entering a period where we're very likely going to see this occurring more and more frequently, where people interpret the output from different programs as being an indication that these systems are becoming way more like us. And we tend to do this, or we tend to assign or ascribe personalities and different aspects of human-centric consciousness to other devices. We talk about some of our devices, boats, cars, what have you, as if they were human. Clifford Nass and Byron Reese wrote a book called The Media Equation years ago that talks about how we engage with many of our technologies, particularly our computers, as if they were social entities. And we're going to see this occur more and more over the coming years as these systems become more capable. Now, something like Lambda, something like GPT-3, the large language model transformers like that, these are basically statistical manipulation and trickery with very, very large corpuses or bodies of knowledge that have been grabbed from the internet, whether they are whole libraries of books, entire conversations from Reddit or what have you. They take this information, and because of how they apply statistical reasoning, this word typically follows this word, this concept and phrase typically aligns here. It sounds like us. There's no understanding there on the part of the machine, but because of how the output simply on a statistical basis ends up sounding very, very like us. There was a chatbot developed a few years back called Replica. not to be confused with Amazon's replica project a few years ago. And the concept of this chatbot was to essentially train itself on the user, so that it took on aspects of the user's personality, so that you were kind of like you were chatting with a friend that was basically a mirror of yourself. And people would find this incredibly, not just engaging, but believable. And all it was is just an acquiring of particular text and information, and then turning it back on us. And we see ourselves in it. We see ourselves reflected in this. And that, I think, is what we're going to see more and more over the coming decades as these systems become increasingly capable, but not yet conscious.
So Rishabh, my last question to you. I mean, would you be able to, as a foresight expert, kind of, point out to, the trends, what you see coming in 2023 and beyond? And then maybe, while you are at it, you mentioned about AI for good, maybe you could talk about that initiative also.
2023 is a little too soon. It may as well, but that's pretty much everything's on the books already. I look out to a topic like autonomous vehicles, for instance, and this has been something that's been pretty much in the public eye, certainly in the media, for 15 years now. We've achieved a lot, but the last part of what we have to achieve to get to what the Society of Auto Engineers refer to as level 5 autonomous vehicle or autonomy for these vehicles, where they are entirely trustworthy as self-driving cars, is going to take definitely more time than I think a lot of people have assumed. It's going to be 2030 and possibly beyond before we can get past these problems where different types of conflicts, different types of sensory issues that come into the systems can be dealt with in a way that we can trust them. We've had it's not that we've had such a crazy number of autonomous vehicle crashes, but certainly we aren't at the stage where we can entrust it with millions of cars yet. So that's going to be out into the 2030s, most definitely. In terms of healthcare, medical progress, increased health spans, I think if we look out to 2040, we get to a point where digital personalized medicine has gotten sufficiently advanced. It will still have some ways to go, but we'll see different aspects incorporated into our homes, into our healthcare infrastructure, so that we're identifying health problems so early on that we can address them cheaply and effectively, and thereby keep people much more healthy in the long term. The biggest problem with this is being able to adequately silo the information. There has to be enough separation between the aggregate information, the personal information, to be able to protect the individual and their privacy and their rights, in order to be at the same time be able to give them these capabilities. So that's a big challenge, but that's a part of where we're going in the later part of this first half of the century. AI for Good is a movement that has been around since about 2015, originated out of, I want to say Berkeley, California. I'm not definite on that. And it tries to align a lot of its goals with the SDGs of the UN, the 17 goals that they have to be able to help promote a better world, better life for people in everywhere. So there have been a range of different studies. There's a lot of different ways that it can and will benefit, but these projects are pretty amazing. There are projects that help us to protect the nature, to be able to reduce toxic language in these large AI models. There's work being done in different types of information processing and gathering in order that we can take. We generate so much information, so much knowledge, so many technical papers every year. It's impossible for experts without some kind of technology to be able to manage this, to know what is relevant that's coming out. And so you have projects that are able to go through and select that information in a way that essentially comes down to what I'm referring to as hybrid intelligence, where the machines are helping us to be better by doing what they can do, which is sort through information very, very rapidly.
Richard, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast and sharing your insights. Yes, I think we're getting into a fantastic world. You spoke about hybrid intelligence. Possibly that's the way ahead. And you spoke about autonomous vehicles and the healthcare applications. And I think in the next, possibly this decade, next decade, there's going to be some great applications which is going to come through these technologies. They'll be great, but they'll obviously, we'll need to be a little bit careful, because these technologies, if it's not channeled in the right direction, it could also be harmful to the human race. So yes, it's a very exciting space. I really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you the very best, and you are on your journey to discovering Southeast Asia. I wish you the very best, and so really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. To my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Eddie. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation, and all the best to you and your listeners in the future.